Thank you so much to the World Music Institute, and thank you, Gabby, for putting this together and asking me to host. So I'm going to take it away and just say to everybody out there, welcome. I hope you're safe and well as you're joining us, and wishing those who also celebrate a happy Ramadan and a good fast for you as well. And we're going to talk a little bit today. I'm very excited actually to be speaking to Mehmet Sanlıkol. And because I grew up also, I love Turkish music, and we're going to talk a little bit about Turkish music, but also this really varied life that that you've lived, Mehmet. And I want to just have everybody welcome Mr. Mehmet Sanlıkol. He is a Grammy-nominated multi-instrumentalist and composer. He's had a varied life journey through a variety of styles of music. You're also a full-time faculty member at the New England Conservatory in the music history and musicology department, I believe. And
Yes.
something that's really wonderful to hear too is that you have the Dunya record label. So I want to dig in and just jump right in and start tell us a little bit about your personal journey. How did you get to this point where you have a lot of instruments behind you?
Sure. So first of all, it's an honor to be starting off the series with you, Ronnie. Thank you, World Music and Brian in particular. But just very briefly about my so-called life and personal and musical journey. I must point out that both of my parents are Turkish Cypriots. And so I have a kind of interesting, complex roots because up until age 18, I grew up in Turkey. However, we would spend a lot of time on the island of Cyprus. And in fact, I even went to school there for like a year and a half. And when this was like in sixth, seventh grade. And these are very important to the formation of my identity because, first of all, there's a lot of Greek culture that comes through Cyprus, much more so than what would be the recent past of Turkey. And also, of course, my parents who grew up under the British, because Cyprus, at the time, part of United Kingdom, were much exposed to Western European culture, and as a result, my mom, who is still alive, is a classical piano teacher. So, first of all, my primary instrument is piano. And I grew up, even though I grew up in Turkey, I certainly grew up more so with the music of Chopin and Mozart and Beethoven. However, of course, all around me, on the radio, on the bus rides, on TV, of course, there was all kinds of Turkish musics. But before I took any interest in any of that, I actually first discovered progressive rock music in my mid-teens, and then that kind of led to the discovery of jazz, which was probably around 15, 16 years old, and then I got very serious about that passion, and all I wanted to do was to come out to the United States, in particular Boston, because I had heard of Berklee College of Music. And so I basically, to make a long story short, I found a way to convince my parents and somehow eventually, because this was not easy, I must tell you. Back in 1992, this was not easy. And so I took me about two and a half years or so, but I finally convinced them. I got an acceptance from Berklee and a scholarship, and in the August of 1993, I came out to Boston to study jazz. It took me 7 years in the United States, in Boston, after full studies at Berklee, and then toward the end of my master's studies at New England Conservatory, is when I finally rediscovered my roots. And about that, I guess we can get into a little bit more detail.
Sure. So it's going around full circle sometimes. It's kind of like I started off on the guitar and I went to the oud. You just kind of did this thing backwards. And I happened to check out your Facebook page as well. And I saw some of your progressive rock influences. I think you had Deep Purple up there as one of your influences as well.
For sure.
It's so funny. It's in a funny way now, you mentioned that too. I came to Middle Eastern music myself through my family and my dad, and listening to that. But in the car and at home, we were listening to Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and all kinds, Rush, King Crimson. And the funny thing is that I did notice that there are a lot of modal qualities to the music, and in a weird way, it was rock and roll that kind of got me interested into Middle Eastern music. I don't know if that was something similar for you with jazz and with rock.
Well, I know for a fact that modal jazz, for example, was easier for me to dig into. Okay, so rather than playing lots of complicated harmonies back to back, that I know. That being said, the discovery of my roots was completely by accident. It's the most unusual story ever,
Do
because
tell.
okay, I mean, right. So we were this was right after the millennium, so this was maybe January or February of 2000, and we happened to be just playing the game of Risk world domination board game with like 3 or 4 friends. And one of my friends, and we were not that many people too, maybe 3, 4. One of them wanted to play a joke on us, and so he's apparently started downloading the music of the so-called Ottoman Janissary bands. Okay, I didn't even know that this was going on. So when it was my turn, his joke was he turned it on, and then this kind of ancient military band music started playing in the background, and of course it was a joke. We all laughed about it. None of us took it seriously, and however, if you may remember, back then MP3 technology was very slow. It would take actually quite a few hours for your computer to download these, files. So he didn't turn it off. So basically these songs kept on downloading. And I mean, I suppose at that time, with lots of Western music and jazz music education under my belt, and that game is long, it went on for 3, 4 hours. And so I started paying attention after a while. At first I laughed it off. And then I simply kind of turned it into white noise in the background. And then, eventually I think my subconscious started paying attention to it. And then maybe 3 hours later, I noticed something that I had never noticed about Turkish music, which was essentially that the modal system, the makam system, was really way more complicated than I had ever thought it to be. And then secondly, and I suppose this was more intuitive, that is the sonorities in the Mehter band, with these woodwinds and brass and lots of percussion, I thought, or I felt, packed a similar kind of energy to a jazz big band.
Yes, I could see that for sure. Yeah.
Right. So basically, it was this discovery that happened when all the filters, ideological filters, Orientalist filters, when they were all lifted, because again, they were there. I really am not a very, well, not very, I'm not nationalist at all. My nationalism is just my love of, the culture. That's it. And my religious devotion is more mystical and spiritual than anything else. So Mehter bands, or their music, for someone who was touring as a jazz musician, etc., at the time, was nothing but a joke. I mean, in all honesty. And
But
so
go
go
ahead. I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Yeah, no,
No, I
please,
was going
please.
to say, please.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, let's pivot actually to talk a little bit about that, because that joke actually really became an integral part of your professional career, which was interesting. You started a record label, Dunya record label, on which you've experimented with a variety of different styles of music, not only Turkish music. But this discovery of the mehter, which is, many might even say, really the original like military band or the original marching band, indeed. You know, from instrumentation, it's not a wonder that many cymbals, great, you know, drum cymbals come from Turkey. And this whole notion that they would, you know, when the Ottoman army would face an enemy or an adversary, they would play consistently for like 24 hours. This, you know, what ostensibly was noise,
In
but
fact, why don't I do a favor to everyone and just put up the image of some historical meta illustrations as we're speaking so that they see what we're talking about. So
beautiful.
everyone, um, you see, I'm actually a little prepared here. Okay. So this is the illustration or a miniature, an Ottoman miniature of the so-called Ottoman Janissary bands, or more properly, Mehter bands. If you can see my cursor, here in the back are the trumpet players, okay? And then right in front of them are the cymbal players. Okay, and then all the way in the back on camel tops, you have the large kettle drums, which are basically essentially the ancestors of the timpani. And then, you know, right in front of them, you have all the bass drums. Okay, they're sideways, but that's the way they're played in this culture. And then, if you skip over to the right, continuation of this band is then and small kettle drums. And then finally, you have these double reed instruments called the zurna, which I will demonstrate later today. And that makes up the mehter band. Here is this is from early 18th century. This is from early 19th century, slightly more refined drawing. Again, trumpets, shams or zurnas. Here's the lead zurna player. You can think of him as the concertmeister. Bass drums, small kettle drums, cymbals in the back, and these guys are either singing or holding the beat and so on and so forth. There it is.
Fantastic. Those look amazing. I mean, they look really too like, I played in a marching band in Chicago for a little while, and people were infatuated with this Turkish thing. So I started to listen to the Mehter band. And with one of my music groups that I played with, Lamajal, that Brian mentioned, we played at the Turkish festival here in Chicago 7 years in a row. So every year we'd play, and they would always hire a Mehter band to open the whole festival. And it was just this thing you would hear all throughout the streets everywhere. And you can only imagine if they were really in strong numbers, like an army, you know. I could see that as being more intimidating than any weaponry, for that matter. It's almost a sonic assault.
I mean, it's kind of strange because I mean, let me put it this way. In the playlist, first of all, just because Brian pointed the playlist out, I'll point out that I have included a Mehter recording, and it's not one of those recordings that you would stumble on in Turkey. It's, in fact, believe it or not, a Mehter band I put together here in Boston. That was not easy either, but I managed. And anyhow, without getting lost in details, I'll say that that, you know, as soon as this discovery was made, and as soon as something deep inside me, you know, started really creeping up on me, which was this idea that I was a foreigner to my own culture, and that I had been that way until I was 25 years old. I don't think I was able to even say this out loud at the time, or I was able to confront that quite easily. But I think it was kind of a wake-up call to discover that, you know, that I was exoticizing about my own country all along, and so on and so forth. So
it's understandable. Yeah.
yeah. So basically, as weird as that may be, and at the time I was accepted to doctoral program at New England Conservatory. So that summer when I went back to Turkey, I made the first thing I did. I swear, the first thing I did after I landed in Istanbul was to go out to the military museum and listen to the Mehter band there. And then I said to myself, I'm gonna study this music just as much as I studied, jazz and or classical Western music. And I said to myself, I'm also gonna write a book on the Mehter bands, which
You know,
10 years after I did.
on that note, actually, that's something I did want to kind of turn to right now is the professional work. I mean, I understand in studying other cultures in the world of ethnomusicology, especially, be it applied or be it academic or however we try to learn about cultures through this means of ethnography, so to speak, and music. You put in quite a bit of work into doing that too, like to the point of where we had mentioned that once that many people don't realize, Ottoman language was actually written in Arabic script. And for you to
Yes.
do a lot of this research, you were saying that you had to really dig deep and discover the roots of Ottoman music, which is quite varied and has so many influences from various cultures, not
Exactly.
not just as a Turkic that we understand today. So what was some of that research that you had to do in terms of language and culture?
Sure. So, for example, first of all, to clarify for our viewers, because this is important for them to understand, often, of course, understandably, we have, especially in different parts of the world, when looking at the Near and the Middle East, we have these tendencies to turn it all into one kind of musical, cultural phenomenon or entity. Um, Unfortunately, of course, as we don't do such, or as we shouldn't be doing such stereotyping with American musics, European musics, other kinds of Asian musics, we shouldn't be doing this kind of stereotyping, of course, with Middle Eastern, Near and Middle Eastern musics as well.
Exactly. Yes.
With the Turkish stuff, historically, one of the most important turning points was when in 1925 the alphabet was switched from Arabic script to Latin Roman alphabet, and so now, unlike many other countries, however, the older script was not necessarily maintained as part of advancement or in the coming years. It was completely terminated, completely. So, for example, my father, who was born in 1944, couldn't read a letter of Arabic script. And so, for example, my grandmother, who had written a lot of notes in the Arabic script, or we would say Old Turkish, my dad couldn't read them, not a word of them.
Yes.
So basically, when I don't know, I mean, immediately I got into this mindset that I was really going to study Turkish music and culture. I don't know. Within a month or two, this just happened. I started studying Ottoman Turkish, and I can't say I became very proficient, but after a little while, luckily the doctoral program at New England Conservatory allowed me to to be able to study and take examinations at Harvard University in Ottoman Turkish, and be able to count that as a third language requirement of my doctoral studies. So I was able to advance, in that direction. Now, one other thing, since we're speaking of scholarly interests and research, another thing, for example, that came upon rather quickly was, of course, all kinds of Turkish Sufi musics, Islamic mysticism and related musics. But often people forget, again, religion in Turkey, while, especially since the Republic, in the Republic era, it has been, of course, more and more and more dominated by Islam. Actually, in the Ottoman period, it was quite diverse, and there was a great heritage of Greek Orthodox Christianity, Armenian Christianity, and so on and so forth.
Jewish
So,
tradition and Smyrna, the
and
whole
of
Rebecca
course,
tradition. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But strictly speaking of devotional, religious, sacred music, again, rather early on in my journey, I also came to establish an affinity with Greek Orthodox Church music or Byzantine music. And so, along with learning how to read Old Ottoman Turkish, I also learned how to read the so-called Byzantine notation. And I'm going to just show a page here of what that looks like. And this is right on my desk because this is my current research. So here is a little bit of Byzantine notation for everyone.
Wow.
Okay, and so this is the kind of notation and research that I've been occupied with more recently. But just again, just to say, you know, when you say the word Turkish, to me, it includes all of this.
I agree 100%. You know, my family's from Palestine, and my grandfather grew up under Ottoman rule for a while. He was born during Ottoman occupation. And and I don't even say occupation, just rule, because it was like what the Roman Empire was. And
Right.
that brings us back to also like maqam and instrumentation, for example. The oud is spelled UD in Turkey, OUD in the Middle East for Arabs sometimes, just because the oud, and it is an Arabic word, which means wood.
Right.
The same goes for many other instruments that we play, from the zurna to darbuka. These are shared instruments of the region, we can really say.
Exactly.
So I
Exactly.
kind of laugh every time somebody says, "Oh, that's Arabic," or "That's Turkish," or "That's Greek," and it's like really these are things shared by everybody.
Right.
There are origins in regions, but that predates any nationalistic efforts you can imagine. But that to get to the heart of it, though, we're talking also about when I taught a world music class here at the Chicago Academy for the Arts, and something I wanted to convey to my students, particularly those in jazz and classical music, is that Maqam music is on par in its sophistication and its complexity to all of these other styles of music. Indeed, it predates a lot of the Western classical music that we understand today. And in saying that, with the Ottoman rule, I felt that maqam was also evolved greatly, because we look then to the 19th century and the 20th century and find all of the early 18th, 19th, 20th century where things were notated all of a sudden. And
Right.
they were using Western standard notation, and this classical music, like today, for example, you can go to any Arab conservatory, and the standard classical repertoire is a lot of Ottoman composers who were Armenian, Jewish, Christian, Muslim.
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
was America, it was like almost a continuation of what Andalusia was in this
Right.
cosmopolitan sense. Um,
Exactly. Yes.
now,
That's the word, by the way. That is the word, cosmopolitan. Yes.
Indeed, indeed. I've been to Istanbul many times, and I have to say that it's for me a mecca for music, because it's not just Middle Eastern music or Turkish music. I mean, it wasn't until I think I saw a movie called Crossing the Bridge, and they really highlighted that you can't say I listen to Middle Eastern music. There are so
Yeah.
many different genres. It's like saying I listen to American music. But I
Right.
wouldn't mind turning to some of the instruments. I know that you are a multi-instrumentalist, and you play many different styles of instruments, and particularly some of the Eastern ones. I know that you said you had a few to show us today. What instrument do you
Sure.
have?
Well, maybe first I can do a little tour of this studio to, in fact, show some of the instruments right here. Okay,
Perfect.
and so let's do that. This is my office study, and so let's switch camera.
We may
Uh,
lose you a little bit on the mic if you back away from the mic, but
right. So I'll try to raise my voice, but anyhow, these are of course, all of my keyboards, my piano over here, and then drum set and a bunch of Southeast Asian gongs. But then here, um, oud. This was my grandmother's oud.
oh my goodness.
And then a bunch of saz long-necked lutes. These are spike fiddles called rabab right there. Actually, I'll get close to one of them so that you see has a coconut shell body, and Here's my kanun, tambur, a set of kudum and kettle drums that we've seen in the Janissary band setup. Okay, a little tour like that, and now back to my position to take out a few of these instruments out of their boxes. So perhaps I can take out, since we've mentioned the oud, I'll take that out. This is the instrument that I often use, in concerts and so on. Not
Now, I have to ask you too. How do you tune it? I would imagine Turkish tuning. Is that correct?
Of course. Yes,
So,
it is the more typical Turkish tuning.
which is ultimately usually a whole step higher than what you might find in the middle in Arab countries.
Yes, exactly. It's a whole step higher, and yeah, I mean, it's the oud is tuned in fourths. Now, more contemporary tuning system would perhaps even go all the way up with fourths, but I have been exposed to the older style of tuning among Armenian musicians that have roots in Turkey, and often they will do octaves. And sometimes you put the very bottom one on a step lower in order to have a nice pedal point, depending on the makam, the modality you happen to be in. Yeah, just very very briefly and on the instrument, not necessarily to play, but to demonstrate, just a little improvisation.
Allah Allah.
Just a little
Lovely,
demonstration.
lovely.
Yeah.
Mashallah. Now, would you call that ushak?
Well, I was actually kind of going for like
Rast and
a
ushak?
makam, yeah, neva, the makam neva,
Never.
which is a combination of a little bit of rast on the top, and then but concluding more like an ushak or bayati, yeah.
And that's also why I would say that I view Ottoman music and then Turkish music, if you will, thereafter, just so we can to circumvent semantics, that it's really an evolution of maqam, because you look at the stuff prior, you look at things that came out from the Nuba and a variety of stuff from Andalusia, and really the combination of maqams that just emerged from that are so rich. And
Right.
something for people to understand of maqam music is not just a technical thing. It's really something that's a condition of evolution of thought as well, because the complexities of maqam are how much more can we elaborate? Well, how much more of a journey can we go on and then discover these modalities can combine together? It's almost like writing poetry, really, than anything.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a language, a musical language of the Near and the Middle East, but of course it has been subject to evolution, and it attained different cultural centers to lead it at different times in history. Perhaps due to the Ottoman throne being this in the city of Istanbul, as you pointed out, the last of the great advancements probably happened, more likely, with the center of Istanbul. But that doesn't even exclude what was happening in Egypt separately or in Baghdad and so on and so forth. It's very complex. It's a language but it has its dialects. You know, there's the Greek Turkish dialect, there is the Arabic dialect, various Arabic dialects, I must say.
Exactly. Indeed, yeah.
And then the Persian dialect, etc. You know, it's to our benefit if we don't reduce it, if we don't be reductionists, you know.
I agree 100% because you can hear it from all different places. And it's like you said, it's so tied into the language and the languages and where people are learning it, but it's an approach to anything. Just like also the different styles. For example, I know you're holding the oud right now, but you had, I think, another instrument, the nai, which
Yes.
many people associate with Rumi, and also Sufism in general, and the Mevlevi order of Sufism. That's Sufi Islam, a mystical part of Islam. Also, I just want everybody to know, I just want to remind all of you viewers out there too, please join us on the Q&A. If you have any questions, we will be taking some questions towards the end. And we can probably answer some of them as we go along. If you're just joining us for that matter too, I'd just like to remind everybody that my name is Ronnie Malley. We're here with the World Music Institute with the wonderful artist Mehmet Ali Sanlıkol, a multi-instrumentalist and composer. So the nai, the reed, Rumi has written so much poetry about this instrument, and it's tied to the ilahiler spiritual musical style that really comes from Turkey. But even though any other Muslim countries have their own Sufi musical traditions as well, and might come up with different names as well, but the nai is integral.
Right, and I think that the nai really has an interesting social positioning here that gets, as you pointed out, heightened in Turkey. So this is a great example of how, you know, certain countries, you know, makam dialect differs even with instrumentation. For example, the nai is shared. There's no question about it. It's just that in Turkey, Turks prefer these longer sizes of the instrument, mainly because of that exact connection, that very mystical, spiritual connection to Rumi, and actually, even more importantly, the so-called whirling dervishes, the Mevlevi order. So, you know, the nai has become the emblem of the Mevlevi order due to, in fact, the opening lines of Rumi's eternal work, the Mesnevi, which is the story of the reed. You know, without getting too deep into philosophy and so on and so forth, let's just say that I would claim most Turks at this point, you know, in their lives, they wouldn't even necessarily know that the nai is in fact directly connected to Rumi's opening lines of the Mesnevi, but this instrument's sound and the particular way the Turkish nai, you know, sounds has been embedded into the DNA of Turkish culture. And like 99.9% of Turks, when they hear the sound of a nai, they'll say, "Oh my God, how spiritual!"
I hear you. You know, it's funny that my friend Merjan Dede, who's like a techno Sufi kind of musician, told me exactly the same thing, that just like you, he reconnected to his Turkish roots walking by a window and hearing somebody play it, and it stopped him dead in his tracks. So yeah, it's definitely flowing through the DNA and the soul of Turkey and the region. Could you give us a little demonstration on this particular?
Absolutely, a brief demonstration of this. So here.
la. Beautiful. Beautiful. And it is just enchanting. That's just got that mystical aspect to it. And you'd probably hear that in a variety of styles of the classical music. You'd hear it in the ilahiler, the spiritual music as well. I know other instruments might be pertinent to more other styles of the Turkish music. For example, in Türkü, which is largely a folk style of music or halk music, you'd hear baglama a lot more often, or the saz. Um, Now, it's funny because I grew up in another similar way where I was playing Middle Eastern music, Arabic music primarily in the clubs and stuff with my dad. And people would often come in and ask for a Turkish song, right? And more often than not, the only familiarity I had with that was the arabesque style, like
Right.
Ibrahim Tatlıses's and Orhan Gencebay. And those were
Right.
like the two names. So in my mind, and that my youth growing up to learn these styles of music, I thought that was Turkish music. But
Well, and it is a kind, it's just that it's a much newer kind. And again, by the way, everyone who happened to be dialing in, I'd like to let you know that on the playlist that I have prepared, pretty much all of these styles have been included, including the Turkish arabesque that Ronnie just mentioned, along with uh, Anadolu rock, which is a Turkish rock style that came to be around late 60s, early 70s. And so I've created a very diverse list of listening material, starting right from the very traditional classical Ottoman Turkish music, but then going through and up to late 20th century popular music material, including some experimentations by yours truly.
I speaking of which, I think you had showed me a video. I don't know. I think you were playing a setar in that or something. Do you have that
Oh,
video, or did you
sure,
have something available?
sure.
I think that was really interesting. You were playing with a harpist,
Yes.
and you were on setar, the Persian instrument,
Well,
which
actually,
actually
it's a jura. It's a
the jura. You were playing the
yeah.
jura.
So it's in fact a little saz, but it is. I turned it into a little bit more like a sitar because in certain parts of Anatolia there are versions of this jura where they don't have double strings on each course. So it's actually only three strings, and I played it with three fingers instead of a plectrum. The harp, on the other hand, is a cheng. And a cheng was, in fact, an Ottoman harp. You will see that its arch is kind of circular, not like the arch of the European harp. So the cheng, the Ottoman Turkish harp, disappeared in late 17th and throughout 18th century. But talk about research, scholarship, and performance practice kind of converging in my life. This video is a great example because this is a little folk song I stumbled upon looking or going through the famous 17th century, mid 17th century collection by Ali Ufki. And this is really the first example of a huge music notation collection in pretty much really Middle Eastern, the entire Middle Eastern heritage, Makam heritage. And so this is a little song I stumbled upon. I don't think it has been recorded other than this version that we have done. I love it. And so here it is all coming together.
Please share an
Uh,
excerpt of that with us. Yeah, we'd love to see
yes,
that.
here we go. Let's go for it. I had the Mehter image up. By the way, you also mentioned Dunya, our record label. This
Hmm.
is our Bandcamp page, and this is all of our CDs and so on and so forth. But here is the piece that you have just mentioned. A song, it's Türkiye Beraye Aşıkanı Hüda, which is a song for those in love with God. This was the title in the collection. It has absolute Sufi references. It feels much like a Sufi song. Here goes. Nereden gelmişiz, nerede gezeriz? Sözümüzü anlamayan anlasın. Akıl ermez biz bir karda gezeriz. Sözümüzü anlamayan anlasın. Akıl ermez biz bir karda gezeriz. Dostun muhabbeti gecada. Okay, I mean
That
that's
is beautiful, beautiful. Everybody should go check that out. That's what a beautiful recording and what a gorgeous instrument. Gosh, those both of those are something
thank you.
else.
I stopped it basically since we want to probably make room for more interaction and so on and so forth.
Indeed, but it's funny. Actually, somebody had asked something, and this is maybe a good segue to that. Is somebody had asked, and I get asked this often too, because I'm sure you and I both know in the world of music, musicology in general, and ethnomusicology, people will come up and say, I love Indian music, I love Middle Eastern music, or I love, it's like saying I love American music.
Right.
But I can't say that I have not been guilty of the same myself. I think we all have to some extent saying, I love jazz. Well, you like bebop, you like free jazz, you like acid, you like big, smooth jazz. And so one of our attendees actually was asking about a question I do get often is there a connection or influence between Turkish and or like Middle Eastern music and Indian music? What are some of the lines? Something I often would say is, both of these styles are modal music, but they both have different styles of grammar.
Of course.
Particularly, but they both pay just as much attention to rhythmic modes as they do to melodic modes.
Right.
What are your thoughts on some of that? Have you ever been asked that question before?
Oh yeah, and I mean, I've like you said, I've certainly taken classes in particularly North Indian Hindustani tradition. So I do know a little bit about that tradition, and first of all, if we were being super historical here, Persia being, kind of a strong influencer in North India as well, and then Islam kind of making its way there. I mean, there are obvious historical connections. In fact, one can even think about, go all the way back to Alexander the Great and think about that kind of occupation coming through, and even consider the names of several instruments, sitar, setar, or tabla, the drum, which is in fact an Arabic word for drum, tabla. So I mean, there are these very solid things that we can point at. That being said, when you really get down to actual musical practice, of course, again, it's while I may be able to attain or consider stronger modal connections, melodic connections, and or resemblances. Maybe that's the better word here. Rhythmically, for example, I thought that the kind of rhythmic interplay I know in Hindustani and Carnatic music is not quite like how we think of or how classical rhythmic cycles function. Usul and iqa, they're different. And so
Yes.
that kind of interplay of subdivisions in Indian music and is not really you can find it in Middle Eastern musics too, but it is not necessarily part of the classical training. Is
It's
what
not
I should
codified. It's not codified as much.
not like
It's more
yeah.
it's more
And I suppose
ornamentation.
yeah, and I suppose the same thing, like the word you used, codified. For example, when we look at maqam, the codification of microtonal vocabulary, it also does not necessarily exist in the same way in Indian raga,
Exactly, because there are certain rules. Often there aren't transpositions necessarily. If you're a classical instrument, you're in one key for an entire show potentially. Somebody had also asked about like the Gharana system, meaning like you know, I've learned this music growing up from apprenticeships with my father's friends who would come or listening. There wasn't any school of Middle Eastern music per se here in America at that time. I'm very grateful to people like Simone Shaheen, who started an Arabic music camp. I'm grateful to others who have started similar type of camps to teach these styles of Middle Eastern music in general. Would you say that there was a similar, I mean, we've had more of a conservatory approach as opposed to the school of somebody. Like if you wanted to learn sarod, you might come from the school of Ali Akbar Khan. Or
Right.
if you wanted to learn, you know, tabla from the school of Zakir Hussein or Ali Raka Khan or somebody, you know. And
Right.
so do we have something, can you elaborate on any of that? Do
Well,
we have anything like that?
yeah. The idea of a chain, silsila, is actually quite important, I think, in classical Ottoman Turkish system, and I think that may be the kind of connection that we can talk about here. So while the idea of the exposure to Western conservatory system probably brought that kind of education rather early on. Well, or not necessarily early on. I shall say, toward the end of 19th century, it started really taking more prominence. However, these chains of teaching were to this day are still very prominent in this tradition.
Now, I know that oud and ney both have just a plethora of instructors and teachers because of the popularity of that instrument. But there is one instrument that I'm very curious to know how you learned. And I'd love for you to even demonstrate it. How in the world did you learn the zurna? How exactly did you go about learning this, like,
Yeah,
mehter?
that was kind of funny. I mean, can you imagine 25 years old, jazz musician touring around the world in famous festivals and pianist, hip keyboardist, suddenly picking up this instrument, the double reed Durna, which is really, I mean, um, in all honesty, not necessarily taken very seriously, these days at least, or in the past century, and well, um, I was so drawn to it that I started trying to practice on my own. And then, as I was studying classical Turkish music, I asked my teacher, and they hooked me up basically with a Zurna player who was in one of the higher up mehter bands of Turkey, the one that was basically associated with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And so this person was kind enough to give me a few lessons when I was in Turkey. And then with Zurna, really, you take only a couple lessons. It's not, then it's really more about listening, transcribing, and putting in, as much or as many hours as possible. But that's pretty much it.
Well, I'd love to hear you play us out with something on that. And this is, this is the kind of instrument basically that you don't need any microphones. And I'll be honest with you, as we're all self-quarantining and self-isolating and kind of staying apart from each other, I feel like taking this instrument outside my door and just blowing it every single day. Just to remind everybody we are well and alive. Check this out.
So here's a little sampler of the Zurna.
Allah. That's great. That's great. Oh my gosh. You know, when I was younger, I couldn't stand the sound of that. When I, because I, used- but
Yeah.
I used to play keyboards in weddings and stuff. That was my, most people didn't know that I was a keyboardist. They all think I'm an oud player. And I was like, no, I'm actually a percussionist, guitarist, and then keyboardist. And then all that other stuff came later. But that was the
Right.
sound I had to play at all of the weddings because that was the
Right.
sound of the dance music and all of the, you know, the groups of people
Right.
dancing together. We have a couple of questions from our listeners here, and then we might unfortunately have to wrap it up, being told. But um, one of the questions that was out there for you is, do you have a favorite oud player?
Obviously, I have a couple, but well, not a couple. I have many, and I can maybe um, mention a few names that people can dig into. From the older masters, I would recommend the Turkish Armenian oud player Udi Hrant.
Oh, the
Uh,
Harant, yeah.
yes, and Hrant spelled as Hrant. Just a wonderful practitioner of the older style, lots of heart, and then when I continue to consider some of the trendsetters in 20th century, I would mention Cinuchen Tanrıkorur. This we may have to write this one out. This is
Sure.
a
You,
hard name to
if you
follow.
wanna
Yeah,
just type it out, maybe for our audience, or if you'd like,
sure,
I can go ahead and do that for you.
sure.
Or we can
Anyhow,
include it in the playlist as well, because I know Brian said he's going to send out some stuff. Um, but yeah, you know, I get asked that question so often, and it's hard to say.
yeah,
It's about as simple as asking somebody, you know, who's
sure.
your favorite guitar player.
There
You
is,
know.
I'll mention two more, just for the sake of it. Um, Someone who was a student of Cinu Tanrıkorur, but certainly has their own voice and is basically, perhaps the most important living oud player from the previous generation is Necati Çelik. I'll
Necati
write that
Çelik,
down
yeah.
as well. And then perhaps, one of my favorite oud players, who is still, I would consider in the, among the younger generation, who has both the chops, the agility, and also the wonderful musicality, would be Yurdal Tokcan. I think these four people could probably provide a nice spectrum.
Indeed, and that's mainly for Turkish style of oud, which is
Exactly,
really
exactly, yeah.
We can say almost Turco-Armenian as well, because the approach to the instrumentation is very similar, I would say, in the tuning as well. But
Yes,
yeah, of the Turkish style of oud, school of oud, shall we say, if we were talking about schools.
right.
I know that I think have to probably wrap up here, but do you have any last words for us about, you know, Turkish music, something, you know, I know somebody here was saying that she's of Indian origin but grew up in Iran, and she's looking for connections between two musical cultures. And something that you
Sure.
and I had spoken about was this term that we use in ethnomusicology called bimusicality.
Right. Yeah.
I feel a kindred spirit in yourself because we've come to our own heritage through our music in a roundabout type of way.
Mhm.
Yet it makes us wonder then and ask the question, well, like, what were we before that then, you know?
Right.
What were we aspiring to do? And I feel like learning different musical styles is like learning about other cultures. And when it's your own heritage, especially, it feels like you're fulfilled in that regard. But it doesn't mean that you have to stop other styles.
No, absolutely
Thoughts
not.
on it?
All I would say, and this is a very dear topic to my heart. That is, bimusicality or multi-musicality. I mean, it's there's no question that we treasure people who are bilingual, trilingual. We encourage, a study of multiple languages. and we understand that there is a certain level of competency, that can be achieved only with vigorous study, particularly after a certain age with languages. Same thing with musics. It's fine to be a tourist as long as you know you're a tourist. But if you don't, and you start muddying the lines, then that's something that I don't necessarily rather value. I think once you internalize multiple musical traditions, and then come forward as a truly cosmopolitan person, I think then we can, or you can contribute much more meaningfully, much more extensively. I think that's really being cosmopolitan, not being a tourist. You can be a tourist all you want. And as long as you know you are, that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. I love being a tourist.
It's
As long
about
as
the
you understand.
self-awareness. Yes,
Exactly.
indeed.
That's all there is to it.
We have just a couple very quick questions, and maybe both of us or one of us can answer that. Somebody had asked, us mentioning Jewish music being part of the amalgam of Turkish music. I had mentioned something of that nature. Of course, Sephardic music
Yes.
is, but that's mainly because after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492 from Spain, a great deal
Right.
of them ended up going to Istanbul
Right.
because usually they would seek actual refuge in what were ostensibly Muslim-controlled areas
Right.
because they were free to practice that.
Yeah.
However, and I've played a great deal of Sephardic music growing up, and obviously there's some from various regions because of the language and whatnot, but there is some specific styles that come out from Turkey because they use the environment of the rhythms. There are some 9/8 Turkish pieces that are sung in
Right.
Ladino. There
Right.
are a variety of different styles, but
Right.
to say just Jewish music is one thing as well. That's also kind of being touristic. I
Obviously, yeah. For example, there is a great tradition of the maftirim, which is a devotional tradition, but it is a Judeo-Sufi tradition. The Jewish cantors, Sephardic Jewish cantors in the cities of Edirne, Izmir, Istanbul, every Saturday morning, they would actually either borrow, perform, sing these songs that were either borrowed from Sufi traditions or composed entirely in the Ottoman Makam tradition. However, always with piyutim, that is liturgical poetry, Jewish poetry. So this is absolutely, a Turkish Jewish, Sephardic Jewish tradition, but very specific to those Turkish cities and so on and so forth.
I think we have a lot to talk about, especially, you hit something on the head there that I'd like to just kind of summate everything we've talked about here is I've studied a lot of Abrahamic tradition and a lot of Abrahamic tradition music, Piyutim being one of them from various regions. There's Piyutim from Morocco,
Of course, yeah.
from Iraq, from Turkey, all over. And also your study of Byzantine music right now, which is fascinating because I know the Byzantine music I hear from Jerusalem and from the Middle East or the Orthodox tradition is often sung in Maqam as well. So it's
Absolutely.
funny to see how these Abrahamic traditions all use the same modal music system of Maqam in their liturgical music from these regions. So, I mean, we are all so much closer to each other than is imagined.
Exactly.
Mehmet, I apologize that we're cutting it short because I think I can sit here and talk for hours on this subject with you. But,
Same here.
I want to thank you so much for being available for us for the World Music Institute. And I want to thank the World Music Institute for having me host here as well. Our friends Brian Kager, Gabby Seppington, and everybody else who is helping behind the scenes here to make this happen. And of course, to all of you attendees for coming out to hear us. So thank you so much.
The pleasure was all mine, and I would like to also thank everyone for starting this entire series with us. It was an absolute pleasure.